I have spent the last 6 months telling you this war was coming. I told you Iran would close the Strait of Hormuz. I told you the United States would launch airstrikes. I told you the ceasefire would collapse. I told you the cost would exceed $100 billion. Every single one of those predictions is now on the public record, timestamped on this channel and verified by events. Today, I am going to make one more prediction. And this one is different from everything I have said before because this prediction is not about what happens next in the war. It is about what happens next in the world. There is one event, one specific catalytic moment that, if it occurs, will transform this conflict from a regional war into something the world has not seen since 1945. And the terrifying part is that every structural incentive on every side of this conflict is pushing toward that event, not away from it, toward it. I am going to tell you what that event is. I am going to show you why the logic of power makes it nearly inevitable. And I am going to explain why, when it happens, the global order that has governed your entire life, the dollar system, the American security architecture, the rules-based international order, all of it enters a phase of collapse that cannot be reversed by any treaty, any election, or any military victory. I'm Professor John Mearsheimer. On this channel, we do not do panic. And we do not do cheerleading. We follow the logic of power. We follow the incentives. We follow the geography. And I will be honest with you, what the logic is telling me right now is the most alarming conclusion I have ever reached. So let me walk you through it step by step because you deserve to see exactly how I got here. Let me start with the structural picture because you need to see the whole board before I show you the trigger. Right now, the United States has spent over $100 billion on this war. It has conducted 11 consecutive nights of airstrikes on Iran. It has requested $67 billion. The CIA has privately assessed in a coordinated intelligence community evaluation that the United States and Iran are locked in a limbo between peace and war. The Strait of Hormuz remains contested. Iran is simultaneously striking American bases across 5 countries. The oil price is above $91 a barrel, and the air campaign is not producing strategic results. Iran's military operates through 31 autonomous provincial commands that function independently even if Tehran is destroyed. Its Mosaic defense doctrine was designed over 14 years specifically to absorb American air power without collapsing. The Wall Street Journal has confirmed through satellite imagery that Iran has already reconstituted portions of its ballistic missile capability after American strikes. The operational tempo of Iranian missile launches against U.S. bases has not declined. This means the air campaign has reached its structural ceiling. It can degrade, it cannot defeat, and every week it continues without producing strategic resolution. The political pressure inside the United States to escalate grows. The Pentagon will present options. Some of those options will involve ground forces, and the moment that conversation becomes serious, the moment American boots touch Iranian soil, the trigger is pulled, but the trigger is not the invasion itself. The trigger is what happens immediately after. Here is the event, and I want you to listen very carefully because everything I'm about to describe follows from structural logic, not speculation. The moment the United States commits ground forces to Iran, Russia will make a declaration. The declaration will be simple, public, and addressed to the entire world. It will say that no party in this conflict is permitted to use nuclear weapons. It will state that if any nation, the United States, Israel, or Iran, deploys a nuclear weapon, Russia will respond with its own nuclear capability against the aggressor. Think about what that declaration does. It does not require Russia to fire a single missile. It does not require Russia to deploy a single soldier into the Middle East. It simply removes the nuclear option from the table for everyone. And the moment the nuclear option is removed, the United States loses the one card that could extract it from a ground war inside Iran's mountain terrain. Without the nuclear threat, the United States is trapped in a conventional war against a civilization state that has been preparing for exactly this scenario for 47 years. A state with dispersed underground military infrastructure across 31 provinces, a state whose geography, the Zagros Mountains, the deserts, the urban sprawl, channels any invasion force into corridors that can be ambushed, mined, and bled for months, a state that has studied Iraq, 2003, and Afghanistan, and built its entire defense doctrine to ensure that decapitation does not work. And here is where it cascades, because the ground war is not the end of the chain, it is the beginning. A prolonged American ground war in Iran does 5 things simultaneously, and each one feeds the others. First, it absorbs American military resources at a rate that cannot be sustained. The defense industrial base is already strained. Patriot interceptor stocks are depleted. Deliveries to Japan and Germany are delayed. The Pentagon has told Ford and General Motors to prepare for converting civilian production lines to munitions manufacturing. A ground war would consume ammunition, vehicles, aircraft, and personnel at a rate that makes the current $100 expenditure look like a down payment. Second, it pins American military power in the Middle East and removes it from every other theater. The forces fighting in Iran cannot simultaneously deter China in the Western Pacific, support NATO in Europe, or maintain pressure anywhere else. Every soldier in Iran is a soldier not available for Taiwan. Every interceptor fired at an Iranian drone is an interceptor not available for Guam. Russia and China do not need to fight America directly. They just need America to fight someone else long enough. Third, it triggers a global energy crisis that makes the current disruption look mild. A ground war in Iran means not weeks of Hormuz disruption, but months or years. Oil prices would not stabilize at $91. They would spike toward $120, $140, potentially higher. The inflation transmission chain I have described on this channel, from oil to fuel to food to consumer prices to interest rates to household budgets, would accelerate to a speed that breaks the Federal Reserve's ability to manage it. The economic pain would not be abstract. It would arrive at every kitchen table in the Western world. Fourth, it completes the formation of the Eurasian bloc that Washington has been trying to prevent. A United States trapped in Iran, hemorrhaging resources, with its nuclear option neutralized by Russia, becomes the single most compelling advertisement in history for the Russia-China-Iran alternative. Every non-Western capital would look at that picture and ask the same question. If the American system cannot even defeat Iran without destroying itself, why are we still inside the American system? The defections would not be dramatic. They would be quiet. A trade agreement here, a pipeline deal there, a currency swap arrangement, a military cooperation protocol, each one a brick removed from the dollar's foundation, each one individually insignificant, together a new architecture. And fifth, it fractures the American domestic political system in a way that may not be repairable within a single electoral cycle. The Vietnam parallel is precise. 57% of Americans already believe this war was a mistake. A ground invasion with casualties, with $200 or $300 billion in total costs, with gasoline at $5 or $6 a gallon, with no visible end state, that produces a political crisis inside the United States that goes far beyond the current fractures. It produces a legitimacy crisis. The question stops being whether this president is competent. The question becomes whether the system that produced this decision is functional. 5 cascading effects: military exhaustion, strategic distraction, economic crisis, bloc formation, and domestic fracture, all triggered by one event: Russia's nuclear declaration after an American ground invasion. Now, I need to address the most important question. Why would Russia do this? Why would Putin insert himself into a conflict that is currently draining his primary adversary's resources? The answer is in the geography. Look at a map. Iran is Russia's southern corridor, the international north-south transport corridor, the network of rail, road, and port connections that gives Russia access to warm water ports and global markets outside Western control, runs directly through Iran. Without Iran, that corridor collapses. Without Iran, Russia is landlocked in a sanctions cage with no path to the Indian Ocean. If the United States invades and occupies Iran, or if the United States breaks Iran so completely that it falls into chaos, Russia loses its most critical strategic partner. The corridor dies. And without the corridor, Russia's long-term economic survival under Western sanctions becomes structurally impossible. So Putin does not have a choice. Russian grand strategy requires that Iran survive as a functional, defiant, capable state. The nuclear declaration is not generosity. It is self-preservation dressed in the language of global responsibility, and the language matters, because when Putin stands before the world and says no one is permitted to use nuclear weapons in this conflict, he does not sound like an aggressor. He sounds like the adult in the room. He sounds like the man who saved humanity from nuclear war. The moral authority that declaration carries is itself a weapon aimed directly at the legitimacy of the American system. Now, before I go further, I want to present the strongest counter-argument because I owe you the real debate. Here's the steel man. The United States will not commit ground forces to Iran. The political class learned from Iraq and Afghanistan. The public will not support it. The Pentagon knows the terrain is impossible. Trump wants a deal, not an occupation. The entire premise of the cascade depends on an invasion that will never happen. That argument is reasonable, and 6 months ago I might have agreed with it. But here is what has changed. The air campaign has reached its ceiling and produced indefinite limbo. The strait remains contested. Iran is still striking American bases daily. The political pressure on the White House to do something more is growing every week. And most critically, the man making the decisions thinks in terms of television, not strategy. Venezuela worked. A quick, decisive operation that looks strong on camera. Trump wants to replicate that model. His national security team has been shaped by that success. And when the air campaign fails to produce the clean victory that television requires, the temptation to escalate, to do something dramatic, to show strength, becomes enormous. The steel man says a ground invasion will not happen because it is irrational. But the history of great power wars is not a history of rational decisions. It is a history of leaders who could not accept the alternative to escalation, which is admitting that the current approach has failed. The invasion may not happen because a calculated strategic plan says it should. It may happen because every other option looks like failure on camera. 3 predictions. Prediction 1. The question of American ground forces in Iran will reach the level of serious internal debate within the White House and the Pentagon before November 2026. It may not result in a deployment decision before the midterms, but the fact that it is being discussed at the highest levels will leak. Watch for anonymous Pentagon sources describing options briefings or contingency planning for ground operations. When those leaks appear, the cascade has entered its preparatory phase. Prediction 2. Russia will formalize a security arrangement with Iran that contains explicit language about nuclear deterrence before the end of 2026. It may not be the dramatic public declaration I described. It may arrive as a clause in a bilateral defense treaty, or as a statement from Lavrov during a Tehran visit, or as a carefully worded Security Council intervention. The form matters less than the substance. When Russia says in any formulation that nuclear weapons must not be used in this conflict, it has drawn its line. Watch for Lavrov's visit to Taiwan. The joint communiqué will tell you everything. Prediction 3. Regardless of whether a ground invasion occurs, The structural damage to the dollar system from this conflict will become measurable in central bank reserve allocations within 12 months. Watch the IMF's quarterly COFR data on global reserve currency composition. If the dollar's share drops below 55%, crossing a threshold that has never crossed in the modern era, it means the erosion I described is not theoretical. It is happening, and it is being accelerated by every week this war continues. 3 things to watch. First, watch the language coming from the Kremlin about Iran. Not the headlines, the specific phrasing. There is a critical difference between Russia expressing concern about the situation and Russia declaring that certain actions will not be tolerated. The shift from diplomatic language to deterrence language is the shift from observer to guarantor. When that shift occurs, the nuclear declaration I described has effectively already been made. Second, watch the Pentagon's munitions procurement. If the Defense Department begins activating emergency production contracts with automotive manufacturers, if Ford or General Motors announces conversion of civilian production lines, if the defense industrial base enters a wartime footing that exceeds the current supplemental request, it means the Pentagon is preparing for a conflict larger and longer than the air campaign. Industrial mobilization precedes military escalation by months. The factories tell you what is coming before the generals do. Third, watch the price of gold. Not oil, gold. Oil tells you about the energy market. Gold tells you about confidence in the monetary system. If gold breaks decisively above $3,000 per ounce and sustains that level, it means institutional investors, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds are hedging against a structural shift in the global financial architecture. Gold is the world's oldest alternative to the dollar. When it moves, it is telling you that the smartest money on earth no longer trusts the system it has relied on for 80 years. Let me bring this together. There is a logic to power that operates beneath the headlines, beneath the explosions, beneath the speeches and the press conferences. That logic does not care about intentions. It does not care about what leaders want. It cares about structures. It cares about incentives. It cares about geography. And right now, the structures, the incentives, and the geography are all converging on a single point. The air campaign has reached its ceiling. The pressure to escalate is growing. The man making the decisions processes the world through the logic of television, not strategy. Iran has been preparing for a ground war for 47 years. Russia cannot afford to let Iran fall. China is watching, learning, and building. And the dollar system, the foundation of everything the United States has built since 1945, is being eroded by the very conflict that was supposed to protect it. The one event that triggers the cascade is an American ground commitment followed by a Russian nuclear declaration. Every structural incentive on every side is pushing toward it, not because anyone wants the consequences, but because each actor, following its own rational self-interest, takes the next logical step. And the sum of all those rational steps leads somewhere that none of them can control. Here is the question I want to leave you with tonight, and I want you to sit with it because it is the most important question I have asked on this channel. Every empire in history believed it was permanent. Athens believed it, Rome believed it, the British Empire believed it, and every one of them discovered, in a moment they did not see coming, that the structures they had built to sustain their power had become the structures that consumed it. The question is not whether the American system will face that moment. Every system does. The question is whether we are watching it happen right now, in real time, one airstrike and one oil price and one budget request at a time, while the headlines tell us everything is under control. I believe we are. And the logic of power agrees. If this analysis showed you something the headlines never will, subscribe to this channel because we are entering the most consequential period in modern geopolitics, and I will be tracking every signal. Tell me in the comments, do you believe the cascade can be stopped, or do you believe the structural incentives have already made it inevitable? I read every response, and your questions shape the next analysis. I am Professor John Mearsheimer. Thank you for watching. Stay informed, think structurally, and remember the most dangerous moment in the life of any empire is not the moment it faces a stronger enemy. It is the moment it discovers that its greatest enemy was the logic of its own decisions.